What's up, mamas? Thanks so much for being here with us. Today we have Samantha Day. She's a learning behavior specialist and certified infant and child sleep consultant. Yes, please, Samantha. We're going to be talking about infant and child sleep. Thanks so much for being here with me.
I am thrilled that we are going to talk all the things that we need to get some solid sleep and behavior as well, because they go hand in hand.
What is the number one method that most people choose to do with their kids?
Yeah. Well, there's so many out there, so many. So I would say, out of a boat of, 20 methods that they could choose from, I would say the most common is some type of interval approach. And there's a lot of ones out there. A lot of people have probably heard of Ferber. I use a slightly different method from that with a lot of my families as far as timing goes. But the goal of kind of a middle of the road interval approach is that you're giving your child independence to try to work it out. You're giving them a little bit of time to themselves, and then you're going to go be right there with them and give them some support. And then you're going to give them some more time to themselves and then some more support. And so a method like that is a way of building their independence and decreasing our level of support, while also staying very consistent. Because sometimes if their level of cry goes up, then our response will go up, right? We're like, okay, I'm going to go in there. I'm going to, we raise our response. But that can create a behavioral pattern in which they think the louder I cry, the more that they respond. And sometimes they think that those high levels of cry are necessary in order to get, what they're looking for, whatever the desired behavior, feeding to sleep or rocking or whatever that is. So if we can consistently guide them with whatever sleep teaching method we choose, it's a way of communicating very clearly where they start to understand and predict what is about to happen. And that is what will calm them in the moments. When we talk about the word crying is their way of expressing themselves, right? And I personally do not believe in hours and hours of crying. When you hear those stories, I don't support that in any way, shape, or form. But if we look at crying as a way of expressing, our little ones have an opinion and they have one way as a baby to express that, right? And that's through tears. So it doesn't necessarily mean distress or abandonment or all the other words that go along with the controversy of teaching sleep. It potentially is talking about a way of communication. And what if we communicated back in a way that we felt comfortable with, while also staying on the path to knowing that our little ones are benefiting so much from sleep. It's so necessary, especially as rapidly as they're growing.
I love that. So consistency is key for them to understand what we're doing. I like that you said that they'll eventually learn and it becomes predictable to them. And that's what calms them. So you mentioned unassisted sleeping. So there are things obviously like pacifiers and bottles and, like lay your kid down with the bottle or give them a pacifier. How do you feel about those types of objects and helping your kids sleep?
Yeah. Well, different answer for both of those different things that you asked. So pacifier, bottle. Bottle, I personally recommend out of the bed. And so we complete the feeding before, and then we lay them down and allow them to learn to fall asleep without that bottle. There are some families that give the bottle and allow them to have it sleeping, but the bottle eventually runs out. And then what happens at 3:00 in the morning when they wake up and they want to go back to sleep, especially if they're at an age where they don't need to be eating overnight, which you could talk with your doctor to figure out when we reach that point. But we all reach a point where we don't have to eat overnight, right? And then if they need that at the start of the night, they're going to be looking for it in the middle of the night as well. So I don't recommend bottles in the bed at all. But as far as pacifiers go, oh yes, pacifiers can be really, really helpful. And there's two different categories with this though. When our children reach the age where they can roll around the crib and they can find that pacifier and they can pop it in their mouth, we're good to go. Sprinkle a couple extra of those pacifiers, around the crib and allow them to find it. But what happens when they're not to that developmental age yet and they can't find it and it falls out and you feel like you're popping that passy in all night long, every time they wake up, they need that to go back to sleep. There's an age, right, where they really might need that assistance. That sucking is so powerful in the falling asleep process. So for your son right now, 6 weeks old, that might be a really helpful tool in the toolbox to help him go back to sleep. But I say tool in the toolbox because there's multiple tools. So if we could have the pacifier be one of the ways that help them go back to sleep, but not the only way, that's a way of just experimenting with different ways to fall asleep without having to rely on one specific thing every single time that it pops out of my mouth.
And what are some more of those tools that that you know of that can help kids go back to sleep on their own?
Yeah. Well, here I'd like to answer that for 4 months and up, because prior to 4 months, a lot of times there are some kids under the 4-month mark that can fall asleep independently. And we can always experiment with that by laying them down properly timed and, a little drowsy, and see if they can do it. And if they can't, I would suggest going and fully assisting in that moment, because some kiddos can't. But when we're at 4 months and up, and we're really working on that skill of being able to return back to sleep, the most powerful thing we can do is start working on that at bedtime, because the easiest time of the day to perfect the skill of falling asleep at all is at bedtime. It's much easier to do that, let's say at 7:30 or 8 or whenever your bedtime is, than it's going to be at 5 a.m. when we've already got a big chunk of sleep in there, right? And the sleep cycles are much lighter at 5 o'clock in the morning than they are at 7:30 at night. So working on that proactively and teaching that at the beginning of the night will be a huge way of supporting them in the middle of the night. But it doesn't always have to be a tool, like a physical tool. The pacifier is, right? We can hold the pacifier, but a lot of the other tools are, is the room nice and dark, supporting, like we talked about? Is there some type of auditory cue that they're used to as a signal for sleep? And so that could be a fan that stays on while they're sleeping, or a white noise machine that a lot of parents choose to use. You don't have to use these things, but that can be a really good auditory cue of like, hey, I know that sound. Okay, it's time to sleep. So those are all cues to them, which circle back to the ability to go back to sleep on their own. So those are a few little things. Some are physical tools. Of course, a swaddle is really a physical tool that's helpful for our infants, our newborns, and then potentially a sleep sack or something like that as they get a little bit older.
Okay. I love that.
One more thing, if I can say real quick, is I usually tell parents to stick to the basics. There are so many baby items out there that you could be like, oh my gosh, she's not sleeping. I'm going to go buy this sleep cycle or sleep sack, and I'm going to buy this swaddle and this, and all these things. Right. And oftentimes it is not a thing that's going to help. And the things might put a temporary Band-Aid on what's happening and assist a little bit. But once we have the foundational things like a white noise machine, in my opinion, and we have it nice and dark, maybe some blackening shades, and a pacifier if you use one, once those basics are passed, I would just really focus on the age appropriate skills that we can teach our child to help them get to the place where they can get the sleep that they need.
I'm glad you said keep it simple, because I feel like exactly like you said, there are so many products out there and really so many things that you hear advice of how to get your kids to sleep, and it can get so frustrating for parents. So what do you tell some of your clients or the parents that just feel so overwhelmed by all of this?
Yes. Stop looking on different articles on the internet. No, I'm joking, but I'm not. And the reason why is because there is so much contradicting information. It's not even the volume that's out there. It's the contradiction. And it would be normal for us to have differences in opinions, right? Because like I said, families are different, parenting styles are different, and personalities of our children are different as well. So the paths are going to be different in reaching it. But you can look up one thing that tells you, okay, this is the best thing in the world. It'll make your child sleep. It's amazing. And then you can research the same thing and it's going to tell you, don't ever do it. It's the worst thing in the world. So it's really overwhelming at that point. And so I recommend limiting your amount of research to sources that you know are accredited, that you trust where it's coming from. There's a lot of articles out there that are not from accredited sources. So always make sure that where you're looking is somewhere that you trust, and find a place that you feel like, okay, I have this question, I'm going to go look here. Right. And so like the families that I work with, they always know they can go to my podcast and listen. They can go to articles. They can find me on Instagram. Like those types of things are going to help them because they have a reliable source. And there's tons of people out there. If it's not me, find somebody else that you fit, well with. So, and then the other thing is I love mama groups, right? On Facebook, on different social media, there's great mom groups up there. But the other day I popped onto one and there was one question about sleep. And there was probably a 20,000 member group. It was a large group. And her one question resulted in thousands and thousands of different recommendations. And some of them, my eyes went like this when I read, right? Others of them, I'm like, okay, that one's okay. But how overwhelmed was that mama? She already went on there feeling like, oh, I don't know what to do. And then she put her question and now she has 1,000 things, messages telling her to do different things.
Right.
So I recommend if you're going to be on a mom's group, maybe sit from the back and listen and take, what you feel like feels right in your mama gut, but cautious not to be overwhelmed by the amount of contradicting information.
I think that's really, really good advice. I love that.